Welcome to a new episode of Leipzig Studies in Religion. In this series, we present publications by researchers from the Institute for the Study of Religion at Leipzig University.
Today, we're doing a real conceptual deep dive. We're looking at a fantastic article by Christoph Kleine, that's pronounced Kleine, called Religiöser Nonconformismus als religiös-wissenschaftliche Kategorie.
Which translates to religious nonconformism as a category in religious studies.
Right. And for anyone who wants to look it up, it was published in the Zeitschrift für Religionswissenschaft, Volume 23, Number 1, way back in 2015.
And our mission here is all about conceptual clarity. I mean, this is a term, religious nonconformism, that gets thrown around a lot. Kleine's argument is that it can be a really sharp analytical tool, but only if we're super precise about what it means and, just as importantly, what it doesn't mean.
Exactly, because it's a term with a lot of baggage. Kleine points out that there are two big reservations people have, two main reasons scholars have been hesitant to use it.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is purely historical. The word nonconformist, with a capital N, originally just meant one specific thing: British Protestants in the 17th century who wouldn't conform to the Church of England.
So the fear is we're taking this very local specific label and trying to slap it on everything, everywhere.
It feels a bit anachronistic, maybe even imperialistic. The second hurdle is, well, it's arguably even bigger. It's about scholarly neutrality.
The prime directive.
Right, because in the real world, nonconformist is almost never a neutral description. It's a label, a stigma. It's what the powerful group calls the weaker group to delegitimize them. A mere negative ascription.
So scholars worry that by using the term, they're just taking sides. They're accidentally reproducing the power dynamics of the past.
Precisely. And Kleine's way out of this dilemma is to go straight to the classics. He says we need to use Max Weber's toolkit and build a rigorous ideal typus, an ideal type, a pure model we can use to compare things, not to judge them.
Okay, so let's build that model. The first and maybe most important step is drawing a really sharp line in the sand between two words that sound almost the same in English: nonconformitate, or nonconformity, and nonconformismus, nonconformism.
That distinction is everything. It's the core of the whole analysis. Let's start with the first one, nonconformitate. Simple nonconformity.
This is just breaking a rule.
Yes, exactly. It's objective, visible rule breaking. And the motivation is what Weber would call zweck-rational. It's purpose rational.
Meaning you're breaking the rule for a specific practical goal, but you're not questioning the whole system the rule comes from.
Perfect. The classic example is the conventional bank robber. This person absolutely accepts the idea of private property and, a market economy.
They just want a shortcut to getting more of it.
They want in. Their goal, getting rich, is completely in line with the system's values. The means are non-conforming, but the goal isn't revolutionary.
Which is why you get that cognitive dissonance. They might tell themselves, oh, the banks are the real criminals, but deep down, they know they're operating within a system they just broke the rules of.
And that's a kind of rule breaking the system is built to handle. Kleine uses this great little example, running a red light in Berlin.
Right.
You are objectively breaking the traffic laws. It's a non-conforming act. The state gives you a ticket, but the foundations of the state don't tremble.
Okay, but nonconformism with the ism? That's a whole different story.
It's a completely different beast, because it isn't about breaking the rule. It's about rejecting the legitimacy of the person who made the rule.
So this is rotational action.
Yeah.
Value rational.
Yes. It's a guiding ethos, a handlungsleitende Gesinnung. It's an inner disposition that says the prevailing order, the government, the church, whatever it is fundamentally illegitimate, and my actions are oriented towards some other higher order.
So let's go back to the bank robber. The nonconformist bank robber isn't just after the cash.
No. There may be a terrorist bank robber who denies the very concept of private property. They take the money to fund a revolution to overthrow the state they see as illegitimate.
So their practical goal, getting the money, is perfectly aligned with their value-driven motivation, which is toppling the system.
And that's why the state's reaction is so different. A normal criminal is a problem to be managed. A nonconformist is an existential threat, a state enemy, because they challenge the very basis of legitimacy.
But what about those weird cases like institutionalized nonconformity? I'm thinking of, extreme ascetics or holy madmen or the Victor Turner called liminal rights where everyone breaks the rules for a day.
That's the paradox that proves the rule.
How so?
Because that kind of rule breaking is actually allowed, even encouraged, because it ends up stabilizing the system. It's a pressure valve. It reinforces the norm by showing its outer limit. Since it never actually challenges the legitimacy of the order, it's just nonconformity. It's not nonconformism.
Okay, that makes sense. So if nonconformism is always about rejecting a specific order, we need to get more specific about how that rejection happens.
And that brings us to Kleine's typology. He breaks it down along two axes. Is the rejection explicit or implicit? And is the goal to fight the system or to flee from it?
Let's start with the easy one. Explicit and intended nonconformism. These are the people who are openly saying, your authority is illegitimate.
Right. And within that, you get the revolutionary type. They want to eliminate the false order and replace it with their higher one. The article gives a fantastic example. The 13th century Japanese Buddhist monk, Nichiren.
Nichiren is a perfect case because he wasn't just having a theological disagreement.
Not at all. He took his devotion to the Lotus Sutra and rationalized it into a full-blown political program. He said all other Buddhist schools, Zen, Pure Land, were literally Teufelswerk, devil's work.
And he blamed them for all of Japan's problems,
Yeah.
famines, Mongol invasions.
Everything. So he wasn't just offering a different path. He was demanding the state actively suppress his rivals and adopt his way as the only legitimate one. That is revolutionary, explicit nonconformism.
Okay, but then you have the other explicit type, the quietistic or escapist one.
They also explicitly reject the legitimacy of the worldly order, but instead of trying to overthrow it, they just want to escape it. Their focus is on the afterlife or some future messianic age.
And the example here is something like the Neturei Karta.
Exactly. Ultra-Orthodox Jewish anti-Zionist messianism. They see the secular state of Israel as illegitimate from a religious standpoint, but their response isn't revolution.
It's withdrawal. They try to live separately and not engage with state institutions because they're waiting for a divine future order. The nonconformism is explicit, but the action is escapist.
Now, the second big category is where it gets really subtle. Implicit and unintended nonconformism.
So this is when a group doesn't actually intend to be nonconformist, but they become nonconformist anyway.
Yes. It emerges as an unintended byproduct of them just trying to be consistent with their own beliefs. The example here is another Japanese monk, Hunmin, from a century before Nichiren.
Hunmin's big idea was simplifying Buddhism.
Massively. He basically said all the complex rituals and scholasticism were unnecessary. All you needed for salvation was to faithfully call on the name of the Buddha Amida, the Nenbutsu.
It was meant to make salvation available to everyone. But in doing
He unintentionally delegitimized the entire religious establishment. The whole system of state-sponsored temples, monastic discipline, the ritsu, it all depended on that complexity. If all you need is simple faith, then what's the point of this massive, expensive power structure?
So even though Huchin wasn't calling for revolution, the logical conclusion of his doctrine was revolutionary. That's the implicit nonconformism.
And the establishment saw the threat immediately. So these groups, to survive, often have to adopt quietistic strategies. They use doctrines like the Buddhist Ububuchisi, the idea that the ruler's law and the Buddha's law are interdependent, or something like the Lutheran Two Kingdoms doctrine.
It's a coping mechanism, a way to say, okay, this worldly system is false, but we'll put up with it for now because our real focus is on the transcendent.
Exactly. It diffuses the conflict.
This keeps coming back to the idea that nonconformism is relational. It's always a challenge to an order. To get more precise, we need to define what kind of order we're talking about. And for that, it's back to Weber.
Back to Weber. He talks about different social arenas, art, politics, religion as Wertsphären or value spheres. Each one has its own internal logic and its own ultimate value. For salvation religions, that central value is Heil, salvation.
And a rationalized religious life is one where your actions are all geared towards achieving that value.
Right. And when you systematize that, you get what he calls a Lebensordnung, a life order. It's the regulated, normative way of life that stems from that core value. It's your religious dower habitus, your lasting disposition.
Okay, so the kind of conflict you get depends on whether people are fighting over the life order or the fundamental value sphere itself.
That's the crucial distinction. If two groups share the same ultimate value, say Two Mahayana Buddhist schools who both agree the goal is enlightenment, but they disagree on the path.
The life order.
Yes, the Lebensordnung. Then you get sectarianism. The weaker group gets branded nonconformist and usually splits off to form a sect of true believers who claim they're living the original value more purely.
But if the conflict is about the central value itself, the Wertsphere.
Then you get a religious new formation. The classic case is Christianity emerging from Second Temple Judaism. The ultimate values, the very definition of salvation, became so different that they were no longer competing on the same field.
The conflict is resolved in a way because they become two different religions.
Exactly. That initial, really unstable, nonconformist state disappears. So religious nonconformism is this very specific, very volatile situation where groups with asymmetric power are making competing claims over a shared value.
Which brings us full circle back to that initial problem of neutrality.
Yeah.
If it's always the powerful group doing the labeling, how can a scholar ever use the term?
By being incredibly precise, we have to distinguish between two different kinds of ascription. There's the Fremzuschreibung 1, Ordnung, the first order ascription.
That's the object level. That's the 16th century church calling Luther a heretic.
Yes. But then there's the Fremzuschreibung 2, Ordnung, the second order ascription. That's the scholar, on a meta level, looking at the situation and asking, based on our ideal type, was there an objective nonconformism here?
Meaning, did Luther's group systematically deny the legitimacy of the prevailing order?
Correct. And making that scholarly judgment does not violate neutrality. I don't have to agree with the Pope in the 16th century to recognize, as a historical fact, that Luther was a nonconformist relative to that system. We're analyzing the structure of the conflict, not taking a side in it.
Okay, that makes the term powerful for looking at history. But what about today? I mean, does nonconformism even make sense in a pluralistic postmodern society where you can just quit a religion if you don't like it?
That is the challenge of modernity, absolutely,
Wow.
because of what sociologists call functional differentiation. The fact that the economy, law, politics, and so on all operate by their own internal secular rules religion has been, well, privatized.
So the old kind of nonconformism is now mostly confined to internal squabbles within a religious organization.
For the most part, yes. So the really interesting sociologically relevant nonconformism today happens relative to a new kind of order,
Which is?
the secular society as a whole. The new generalized norm is that you accept this differentiation. You're expected to be a kind of social chameleon.
You act one way at work, another way at church, another way at a soccer game.
You're supposed to suspend your overarching religious worldview when you step into a secular system. You don't quote the Bible in a scientific paper or demand that religious law override economic policy.
And the person who refuses to do that, that's the new nonconformist.
That is precisely where Kleine lands. He says the new prototype for religious nonconformism is fundamentalism.
So in this model, fundamentalism isn't about literalism or violence. It's about a structural relationship to secular society.
Absolutely. Fundamentalist groups are the quintessential nonconformists of the modern world because they refuse to play this chameleon game. They refuse to suspend their religiously guided way of life just because they've walked into the office or the courthouse.
They insist on the primacy of their religious orientation over everything else.
Yes. Over the demands of all these separate autonomous systems, that refusal to accept functional differentiation is the ultimate act of nonconformism in our world. It's a direct challenge to the basic operating system of modern society.
Wow. It really connects someone like Nichiren, demanding religious primacy over the medieval state, directly to contemporary groups demanding religious primacy over secular law. The structure is the same.
The structure of the conflict is identical.
This has been an incredibly clarifying deep dive. Let's just quickly recap the main takeaways. First, we have to define nonconformism as a value-rational ethos that rejects legitimacy, separating it from simple rule-breaking.
Second, we have that useful typology. We can ask if the nonconformism is explicit and revolutionary or maybe implicit and unintended.
Third, using Weber's framework. The fight is either over the life order, which leads to sex, or the core value sphere, which leads to a whole new religion.
And finally, that this whole framework gives us a powerful new way to understand fundamentalism, not as a belief system, but as a structural refusal to accept the differentiation of the modern world.
That leaves us with a really provocative final thought. If modern nonconformism is the refusal to suspend religious norms, maybe we should look at how good religions are at building in their own rules for suspension, like the ways Hinduism and Buddhism have historically relativized nonviolence in certain contexts. The degree to which a religion can do that might predict how much conflict it generates with the outside world.
That's a fascinating thought.
Thank you for listening, and we hope to welcome you back for another episode of our series, Leipzig Studies in Religion.